Why focus on Riesling? Why should people be drinking Riesling?
Ooh, why should people be drinking Riesling? Let's begin with the fact that it's the greatest grape from which wine is made. Not just the greatest white grape, the greatest grape, period. And I think that the reasons for Riesling are many and varied, but let's begin with that its inherent flavor is beautiful, complex, and interesting. And because its inherent flavor is beautiful, complex, and interesting, it doesn't need to be diddled or manipulated. So Riesling as a grape variety is the variety that most resists manipulations in the cellar because its inherent flavor that comes out of the ground is already interesting enough. I'd say the second thing is it's capable of being beautiful in such a variety of ways. You can have very beautiful bone-dry Riesling. You can have very beautiful Riesling with a modicum of sweetness. You can have very beautiful Riesling with a lot of sweetness. And as we discuss this question of sweetness, which for many people is the barrier that keeps them from approaching Riesling, I think, first of all, we needn't shrink before it because we often tend to conceptually confuse sweetness. All sweetness isn't the same. There is the sweetness of an apple, and there is the sweetness of a Twinkie. One good, the other not good. So when you're talking about the sweetness of a beautiful piece of fruit, you know, something that's crisp and vivid, and you wouldn't want to eat an apple if there were no sweetness in it. Any sensible, sentient being would spit it back out. So Riesling succeeds in a variety of styles. Riesling also, when it has sweetness, often has that sweetness at the expense of alcohol. So you can get a tremendous volume of flavor, really beautiful, interesting flavor out of Riesling, at or below 10% alcohol. And this is good for your food because high alcohol has an anesthetizing effect on the palate, and it's good for your body. Very high alcohol wines somatically tend to be nervous system depressant, and not to mention all the other social resonances against drinking a lot of alcohol. So what else can I tell you about Riesling? The Riesling wine, the Riesling grape and the wine that it produces excel by the quality of its flavor, not by the power or the intensity of its flavor, but by how it tastes. Not how much flavor it has, but how good the flavor is. So in that sense, cultivating a taste for Riesling helps the drinker avoid a very common confusion in wine appreciation, which is the more flavor there is, the better it is. As Kermit Lynch once said, that's like judging a piece of music by how loud it is, or by judging a book by how long it is. You know, the question is not how much does it taste, the question is how does it taste. It's again, not the intensity of the flavor, it's the flavor of the flavor that we're concerned with. And because Riesling can deliver a tremendous amount of flavor without a tremendous amount of volume, I think in that sense, it, if you will, trains the taster to appreciate the flavor for what it is, not for how much it is. And that's good. It helps us to appreciate issues of balance, complexity, harmony, delicacy, finesse, all the things that really make wine worth cherishing, as opposed to just a big glomming whomp of flavor that shoves you down onto the sofa and just says, okay, you just sit there, big boy, and I'll strut my stuff.
Also, Riesling transmits terroir probably better than any grape in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you know, here nobody really knows why. But the Riesling does transmit terroir. Of course, vine is a creature that needs to sink its roots down in search of a reliable aquifer. And Riesling tends to be planted in very geologically complex soils. Riesling's a late ripening variety, and so you have to do whatever is necessary to maximize the odds of its ripening. So you want to give it a certain angle of exposure to the sun, so it gets higher power sun, kilocalories, what have you. So Riesling is not only is a transmitter of very minute nuances and distinctions from one site to the next, but Riesling is also like a mirror, metaphorical mirror to the geology of the site where it's planted. Randall Graham said something really beautiful. He was tasting a Münchberg Riesling from André Ostertag in Alsace, and he said drinking this wine was like shaking the hand of a mountain. And that's Randall is such a beautiful phrase master in those regards, but it's very vividly conveys the point that Riesling wines when you taste them made in the same cellar from contiguous or nearby plots of land, and you see that with all the other variables removed, the wines are nonetheless different from each other, that is the first in a daisy chain of very interesting thoughts and speculations that ultimately take you back to the wonder of creation. Why? Why do these taste so interestingly different from each other? What is it saying? This vineyard speaks with that set of flavors, and its neighbor speaks with a different set of flavors. So again, you start first of all being delighted at the variations of which this thing is capable, and as I said, that really sets you off into a chain of appreciation and gratitude that ultimately I think can be almost sacramental. Pinot Noir takes people there. Nebbiolo certainly takes people there. But Riesling, greater than any, can and will take you there. On the other hand, if you just want to slug it down, the stuff tastes good. You can go as far with it as your own temperament cares to take you, but you don't need to feel that if you're not having some great holy moment with Riesling, that you're not getting it all. You just go as far as you want. Riesling's a very forgiving variety.
And keep trying.
And keep trying.
Let's talk a little bit about grower champagnes. What are grower champagnes, and how are they different from some of the bigger brands that are out there, and why should people be drinking them?
The big houses in Champagne have had it very easy for a really long time. It's the only region in France at this point that wasn't an artisanal production culture, because it has been dominated for the last 120 years by the big houses. Now, up until about a generation ago, most of these big houses were still family owned. Now many of them are owned by multinational luxury goods conglomerates. You have Moet and Chandon and Veuve Clicquot owned by Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, which is a $5.6 billion luxury goods conglomerates, basically selling matching leopard skin luggage and monogram ballpoint pens and all the stuff without which the shelves of duty-free shops would be bare. And for that, if no other reason, you should drink grower champagnes, because you don't know what these guys are into. I mean, I'm not suggesting that they're into mischief, but they're selling all this stuff, all this luxury stuff. The grower is only selling the champagne from the grapes that he himself grew. So at the very least, you can say when you buy grower champagne, you can be certain that no dolphins were harmed. So there's that. The other thing is, to the extent that we tend to prefer to buy from small producers, to know the people who grew our stuff, as opposed to buying a product that has been fashioned for us by people who have studied our consumption habits and have twiddled to the nth degree the thing to make it so that we'll like it. The small grower is simply transmuting what came out of his ground. And yes, of course he wants you to like it, but the thing is what it is. It isn't what it's been crafted to be to appeal to you as a consumer. So when you drink those types of products, you sacrifice a certain amount of your humanity. You are a consumer who is responding in a Pavlovian way to a set of signals that people who have studied your responses have focused to engender that response. When, on the other hand, you drink a wine that was made by a family, a guy just like you can go to him and you can check his vines out and you can sit in his parlor and you can get to know him and you can pat his dog on the head. You're a total human being doing that. You're not just a consumer. You're not just a unit responding the way you have been programmed to. So there's that. The next thing is industrial production protocols will make very reliable bags of Doritos, and it's a very reassuring thing that every bag of Doritos tastes like every other bag of Doritos. That's not a bad thing. It's not morally bad or ethically bad, but it's not the experience that we go to when we drink champagne, or should, in my opinion. We must remember that these big brands are produced in factories with large industrial production protocols. That sacrifices a certain amount of individuality and distinctiveness in order to have this homogeneous thing that will always taste the same. I don't like that about wine. And most people who graduate to a certain extent into wine don't like it about wine. Why then do they tolerate it about champagne? Well, again, because we've been sold this bill of goods about champagne. There are people who don't actually realize that champagne is sparkling wine. They think it's some concocted beverage that may not even have to do with wine. So when you drink producer champagne, you're drinking distinctive artisanal champagne, just like you're drinking from wine everywhere else in the world. But now you're getting to drink the wine that is the voice of a particular piece of land, as rendered by an individual and his family who have a close, intimate relationship to their vineyards. And that relationship is embodied in the wine. And so when you drink the wine, you participate in that relationship. So you become part of a nexus, you become part of a chain. The grower is united with his land, his wine expresses the connection, you taste the wine, you like the wine, you are united with his connection to his land, therefore you too are united to his land. So grower champagne helps to remind us that there are these distinctive individual places in the world. And in a sense, metaphorically of course, they take us there. If you compare that to the experience of opening a bottle of industrial champagne, you're simply a consumer drinking a product that almost might have come from anywhere.
Like any product, like Coca-Cola.
Like Coca-Cola, and there are things very much in common between those things. Now, obviously, industrial champagne, you're dealing with a kind of a meso-terroir aspect. Obviously, they're getting grapes from throughout the region of Champagne. But they don't like to talk about terroir because they realize that their work snuffs out its expression. So they prefer to tell you that all champagne must be a blended wine, but that's, of course, a very self-serving...
They hide behind this sort of house-style thing, yes.
Yes, indeed they do. And hiding behind it, of course, is, you said it, not me, but I won't disagree with you. But they tell you that it has to be a blended wine, which is, of course, at the very least self-serving, and at the very worst, I think, patently false. And we can demonstrate the patent falseness of that by showing individual terroir champagnes and asking people, well, which do you think are more interesting, and which do you think taste better? And the other thing is, of course, the feel-good experience. Who'd you rather support?
Yeah.
Would you rather support the guy in the ascot and the Lubiam suit and the private jet, or would you rather support the little vigneron with dirt under his fingernails? Would you rather support the champagne that's crafted by a marketing committee that has studied your consumption habits? Or would you rather support the champagne that simply grows out of the ground and the grower lets it speak and you get to see what it tastes like and what it has to say?
And we're talking about very small production numbers, in some cases 2,500, 3,500 cases, 4,500 cases.
Oh, in some cases less than that. I mean, the smallest grower in my portfolio makes 1,700 cases a year and the biggest makes about 16,000. The largest producer of champagne in my portfolio bottles in a year what Moet and Chandon probably has bottled by 3 p.m. on January 2nd.
Right. And there's just no way they can produce the same quality. I mean, scale just prevents the same expression of artisanality, of terroir, etc. and so forth.
Scale involves compromise. It must
Always.
it must do. And again, for me, these are issues of honor, if you will. But they don't need to be for someone else. The other argument that one can make on behalf of artisan champagne is just dollar for dollar, you're getting more interesting flavor for your money.
Well, and I was going to ask you that. I'm not trying to blow smoke up your ass, but how is it that these champagnes are so well priced? I would think that scale of production and that grower-producer onus on him would make the wines more expensive, but in fact at the same price essentially as the bigger brands.
So logically you would say, of course, that the bigger brands can amortize their fixed
Exactly.
costs and so forth, but the truth of the matter is the little grower doesn't have the PR budget that the big brands have, and that's what drives the price up of the big brands, is all the tremendous amount of money that they spend for product placement in James Bond movies. And, not at all the stuff that they do.
Right.
And, if you go into a market and a big house, which has been accustomed to having a lot of champagne poured by the glass in all of the top tier of restaurants, if they start to feel threatened, then they will drop the price to lose money just to maintain their market share. So they are also manipulating prices. That's another reason that the grower's champagne can sometimes be cheaper. Look, the fact is, though, we never sell, at the non-vintage level, we never sell producer champagne on price. We tend to be more or less at parity with the big houses. We offer, I think, a superior glass of wine. Where it gets very interesting is when you trade up to the vintage level and to the tête de cuvée level. The tête de cuvée prices for the big houses really have nothing to do with the cost of production. That's just That's just charging the highest price that they can, hoodwink some desperate hipster into paying. And, at our level, we're selling our tête de cuvées for half the price that they're selling theirs for. So, now you're seeing on one hand a price that truly reflects the production cost, and on the other you're seeing a price that is simply this kind of symbolism.
And where that comes to the customer is value in the glass, flavor in the glass.
Flavor in the glass, absolutely. And it's not a marketing committee saying, although we could sell this wine for $75, that customer doesn't want to pay only $75 for it. He'd rather pay $125 for it because he's got the money and it's burning a hole in his pocket.
Well, that's good. Anything else you want to touch on?
You've really
Covered quite a bit of
kind of
ground.
covered quite a bit of
Can we
ground.
do this again in the future?
Absolutely.
Can we have this conversation, say, another 6 months or a year from now?
Sure.
Or work up some more questions?
Okay. I'll have a better hair
Some
day
more
that
wine.
day.
Well, don't worry about the hair. Just bring more wine.
I'll be happy to bring more wine. Thank you, actually, for your questions. Your questions were very stimulating, and they got me off into all of my little rambling tangents. But
And I just want to take this opportunity to thank Doug Rankin for making this possible.
So not necessary.
Doug, by the way, who is one of the best drivers with whom I have ever ridden.
Do you ride in the back or do you ride up front with him?
I did ride in the front, and for the most part, I was able to keep my eyes open.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thanks again, John.
And I'm sure that you'll be able to get that puddle off the seat, with the eventually, right?
Terry,
Jim, thanks a million.
a pleasure, really.
Yeah, for me too.
Seriously.
For me too.
Keep
Thanks
up
for this.
the job for the wine. Keep bringing us
I hope it turned out okay. If you need to do a lot of editing, I'll understand.
No, no.
And I'll send you a copy to this, any your address you want to give me, or